So our first presentation this morning is Living with Narcolepsy During the COVID-19 Pandemic, a virtual panel discussion presented by Avadel Pharmaceuticals. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our two speakers. They are Cara Sulzer and Dr. Asim Roy. Cara Sulzer began having narcolepsy symptoms at the age of 16 and was diagnosed with type 1 narcolepsy at 20. A high school English language arts teacher and drama director for 13 years, this last year she has put all her efforts into her role as mum to her 2-year-old daughter. She loves to read, write poetry and dance to records. Cara lives in Cincinnati, Ohio with her wonderful husband, an amazing daughter, and Glasgow the cat. Dr. Asim Roy is the medical director of Ohio Sleep Medicine Institute. He is board certified in sleep medicine and neurology and works in close collaboration with healthcare providers to deliver continuous and coordinated sleep medicine care to adult and pediatric patients. Dr. Roy is the author of various articles, chapters, and books covering, among other topics, sleep and neurological disorders, narcolepsy, idiopathic hypersomnia, confusional arousals and sleepwalking, cataplexy, and REM sleep behavior disorder. He is also the principal investigator involved in clinical research trials for investigational treatments, including an open label study of a potential once nightly treatment option for adults with narcolepsy being developed by Avadel Pharmaceuticals. Thank you both for joining me today. I'm going to hand over to you now. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Cara. Good to see you again. Claire, thank you for that introduction.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
So, our goal for today is just to kind of have an open discussion and, dive a little bit into Cara's, experience of getting to the diagnosis, a little bit about living with the disease, some aspects of the disease that some of you may experience as well. And then also with the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, how that's kind of changed different aspects of narcolepsy, different aspects of sleep medicine, and how we practice medicine. So we'll dive into that quickly here. So I think just to get started, I think Cara, if you don't mind, if you can just tell us kind of how did you get to the diagnosis? What was that journey like?
Sure. I was diagnosed at the age of 20. I was a student at the University of Iowa. And I was diagnosed by a neurologist at the University of Iowa hospitals and clinics. And immediately after my sleep study, they said, yep, you've got type 1. So it was a pretty quick diagnosis in that way, but it wasn't quick because my journey actually began when I was 16. I started having huge waves of sleepiness. Anybody who's experienced excessive daytime sleepiness can understand what I'm talking about. And those just got progressively worse and worse. And then I started experiencing weakness in my hands and in my head when I would laugh. That was my cataplexy. And then as time went on, I was a freshman in college, the hallucinations and sleep paralysis kind of became a part of my life as well. But there were basically two incidents that led up to my sleep study, both of them happening in the 6 months prior to. So the first one was, I was at a New Year's Eve party in my hometown with my hometown friends who knew of my weakness thing. And they tried to intentionally trigger this in me to try to get me to fall. They succeeded. And I fell supine on the floor in a full-blown attack. And you're conscious and aware in an attack. And kind of getting heavy right away, sorry, but two of the people at the party came up and started to try to do fake CPR on me as like a joke. I, of course, was aware of this and of their presence. It was disturbing. When I finally came out of the attack, I realized they thought I was asleep. And my nickname with them for a few years actually had been Narco because I fell asleep all the time. So I was pretty devastated, and it was just an awful moment. And then, but I went to in desperation, I don't know why I didn't like use our dial-up or something. I'm sure we had dial-up at the time, but I didn't use the internet. I went to my dad's office, and he had a big medical journal or a big medical dictionary, giant thing. And I opened it up and I looked up the word narcolepsy, and I thought, can I actually have this thing? What is it? And I looked it up, read the definition, saw what cataplexy was, and I was like, this is my life. I mean, I know what I have. But I don't think I really understood that there was treatment. I didn't really understand it was something, I knew it was a neurological disorder. I didn't understand that there was treatment. So, you just keep going, you just keep pushing. And the second thing that really led me to a doctor was a car accident. So a few months later in the spring, I was driving back to the university from my hometown, and I swerved and I fell asleep and swerved. I was going 80 miles an hour on Interstate 80. Good idea. And hit another car, and there were no injuries, minimal damage to the vehicles. Miraculous, really. And it was a wake-up call, pun intended, I guess. And I told my parents, I knew what I had, so I told them I need to see a doctor. And I finally pushed. I finally found it in me, 4 years on, to get some help.
Wow. So, I think that's one of our challenges that we see as well, is not every, you kind of were proactive in trying to figure out what you might have, which many people don't, or rely on, clinicians to tell them. And many of them don't have as dramatic symptoms or major events like the car accident or the event where your friends induced cataplexy. And so I think that can become very challenging, is why, on average, it takes 10 or 15 years before a diagnosis is typically made. And I think, education's critical, and pursuing, being an advocate for yourself, I think is really important, which I think gets under-recognized. And you almost accept what other clinicians might say. You might be depressed, or you might have anxiety or ADD. I mean, these are just such common misdiagnosis or coexisting diagnosis. And I think that makes it much more challenging to figure out, what might be going on, especially if you don't have all that, what we would call the classic symptoms or the extreme versions of those symptoms. So that's a dramatic path that you had. And again, you were being a advocate for yourself as well. In terms of cataplexy, this is, I think, a difficult diagnosis for many of my colleagues, myself. We don't always get a good sense of cataplexy unless it's, more obvious sometimes. And so how would you describe, and why do you think it might be poorly understood?
Cataplexy is so hard because it is such a specific feeling. It is just a sensation that, is like nothing else. And I've had seizures, and I've had, so it's like, I have other things, other neurological or nervous system things, but it's like nothing else. And yet it is so hard to describe, so hard for people to grasp, I guess. The best way I can say is, if anybody's ever swam an IM or run a marathon, and you see people, like I've gotten out of the pool before, and your muscles just don't quite hold you. They, you kind of drop with it. You see people after a marathon and their muscles just won't hold them anymore, and they kind of collapse. I imagine it's sort of the same sort of sensation. But I think there's 3 really important things that people understand about cataplexy, that I don't, people they just see people fall, maybe, is what people think. But it's important that you understand that they're conscious, they're aware, they're not impaired in that way. So if someone has a full-blown attack, they are awake, you can speak to them. They're not falling asleep. I think that's really important. My friends obviously did not understand that. The other thing is that it doesn't have to be full blown. Actually, I would say I've only fallen I don't know, 10, 15 times in my life, really fallen and had to lay in it for a while. Most of it is partial and really subtle. And you probably wouldn't see it in me mostly anymore. My head and my hands are the first drop. And it can be like up and down, 1 second, half a second. It can be, actually for me, it can be as subtle as my eyes will unfocus and refocus. And I can feel it. I can feel it inside of me, and yet nobody would be able to see it. And then the third thing is just that it's tied to an emotional trigger. At least, I mean, I think that is for most people, but for me, it's very much an emotional trigger, and that's generally laughter for me. But it has to kind of catch me off guard. It has to my husband is so good at this. He is such a dry, witty sense of humor, and he'll just out of the blue say something, and he has to hold my glass immediately. Like he knows, he'll just go for it. Because that water will be going down. So laughter, but it can be frustration, anger, sadness, all those things can trigger it. I will say that, and I know this, they're kind of focusing on mental health in this webinar, and I don't usually let myself go to emotional places when I'm not around people I don't trust. So, and even actually, I mean, I would just say like my body has decided to guard itself against cataplexy. Like I didn't make the decision necessarily. I feel like my body decided to shorten my emotional range. And that means that I don't laugh as heartily. I don't cry very freely. And that does protect me from cataplexy, but it's also not necessarily super healthy. So that's part of my mental health that I continue to work on. Is I would love to find a better balance between that, so that I can laugh and cry and express. And that is, that's kind of where I am, but it does have an impact on your emotions, and therefore your mental health too.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. We have so many patients, I think, that kind of become guarded, become stoic, because they don't want to have, they want to protect themselves from these events. And it was interesting to hear you just say even your body kind of does it automatically because it's kind of protecting you. The assumption on a clinical side, at least from my perspective, is we believe you and other patients do this, as a way to protect. But to hear it that it could even be an automatic way to control and prevent these episodes is very interesting. And again, if you've had a dramatic event, I think it becomes natural to protect yourself from experiencing that again, because it's not a good scenario, and so your emotions become much more tight, or you hide them because if you open that door up, it could trigger a bad event potentially. And that's a valid point. This is why I think even just being sleepy, independent of the cataplexy as well, your mood, all that gets affected by that. And so this all, kind of ties to that mental health aspect. And I think support is critical, to have family, friends that understand and not take advantage of, situations like that. And I've heard that story many times where, people who know you enough, but kind of want to, think that it's funny to trigger something like that, at the cost of what, right? So I think it's important to be around people that truly, understand what you're living with, and not try to take advantage of something like that for their own, will or benefit. So, for many years we believe narcolepsy is rare, but we thought it was extremely rare. And I think we know now that it's not as rare as we had previously thought. It's estimated about 1 in 2,000 people have narcolepsy in the US. Around the world, it's estimated somewhere around, I believe, 3 million people suffer with narcolepsy worldwide. So definitely more common than I think we had thought 20, 30 years ago. So in terms of your work, your personal life, your relationships with your friends, with your family, how did it affect you? And then how have you managed to try to, deal with all these things?
Yeah. Narcolepsy, I'll be honest, impacts every single aspect of my life. From, my job, my friends, my teeth. When you self-medicate with a lot of caffeine and sugary drinks, yeah, that happens. Yeah, it's impacted basically every aspect of my life. Teaching was my passion. It still is. I mean, I still love teaching. I just am not doing it right now. But I struggled to be the amazing, on top of everything teacher that I wanted to be. I was passionate. I loved it. But grading 100 essays, I had 100 students. It was tough. My hair was wet. I had no makeup on. I was on stimulants and caffeine, and it could be really rough on my body. And I would say that, it was hard on that life, but it also, it led me to my husband in a lot of ways, because he was, we were both students at the College of Education. And, when I told him I had narcolepsy, he was so empathetic and just wanted to know what it was like for me. And I was like, wow, this guy's amazing. So, yeah, keeper for sure. I totally fell in love with him right there. So, it led me to this amazingly empathetic person who's a rock in my life. So, got me to a good guy, I guess. Yeah, but it's impacted, my decision not to teach anymore when I wanted to start a family. It's definitely took pregnancy and everything, and parenting takes a toll on my body. Yeah, it's really impacted things, but I've found ways to live and to cope and to keep growing as a human, really, because of narcolepsy. And it's definitely made me a more empathetic person. I'm very in tune with my body as far as like understanding it, or trying to understand it. I'm in a new realm now. But yeah. And you said you want to know some ways that I've learned to cope and deal. Yeah. So for the first 10 years, it was not great coping skills. It was, medications, which were good, which were helpful. But I thought, yeah, this will fix it. Right. That's not true. They're great, but they're great, but they can't fix it all. And then I did a lot of self-medication with, like I said, caffeine and sugary drinks and all that. And push. I pushed myself so hard to the limit. And then, about, I don't know, 10 years ago or 8 years ago, I found dance. And I started doing ballroom dance. I know it's a weird niche community, but and Lindy Hop and all sorts of dance. And I found, I mean, dance makes me feel so alive. It's my happy place. Alive and awake and healthy and strong. And I had a community and friends. And yeah, and it really changed my life for the better and physically made me stronger and healthier. But I've more recently been dealing with the other aspects. I've been working on my nutrition. Even just the last few months, I've really been working on that. I'm trying to think of other things. Mindfulness, my mental health. I've been doing a lot of work with that. So yeah, there's been a lot of things that have helped me through. Those are some of the bigger ones.
Yeah, no, and I think you obviously have had great support, and people around you that understand, what you're going through and know the limitations of what you can or can't do. And I think for many people that's not always there.
And that took time. That
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have you have to educate your family, and you have
Right.
to choose your friends wisely.
Correct. And I think that's a big part of a lot of our patients is they 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 want that support, and it's hard to gain it because it's a disease that's kind of hidden. There's no rash, there's no obvious signs or symptoms. That's all behind you, and so people don't understand. And again, sleepiness, tiredness, and getting called lazy. I mean, these are such common issues with narcolepsy, and how others just can't relate to the disease very easily, or say there's, fix it by getting more sleep, or fix it by exercising when you don't have the energy to exercise. So I think it's really important to incorporate family and friends as early as possible, explain the disease as well as you can, and reinforce, hey, I can't do everything that you can do. And we need to understand that. So again, I think being an advocate for yourself, and again, some people just, they don't have that support. And so I think it makes it even more frustrating then, and more challenging.
Absolutely.
And again, drugs don't solve everything either. So doing the nutrition and taking care of yourself first is critical. And there's things you can do that do help. So
And it's so hard to do that when you're just you're on fumes,
yeah,
and I don't feel that I'm there now, but I remember,
yeah,
I was on fumes, and that's why working on the nutrition part was so hard, because I was working so many hours. Um, and that was a really difficult one to work on.
right. You're running on E basically.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Uh, I do want to transition a little bit to some current events in terms of the pandemic and COVID. And I think there's some aspects from my perspective that I want to dive into as well. But what's interesting from your perspective is you had COVID, and from just to talk about what you experienced, the challenges you potentially are still experiencing, and how it kind of changed how you were before you were diagnosed with that.
Yeah. Um, so the first few weeks, I got COVID in June. Um, I was very, very careful, and I went to Target with a mask on, and I got COVID. So it was rough the first few weeks. Not even so much physically. My symptoms were fairly mild, and stayed fairly mild. Um, Although I had many of the symptoms. But mentally, it was a huge challenge. It was full of a lot of fear that I wouldn't be able to take care of my child, fear that it would get worse, fear that my husband would get it and he'd be sick, or my child would be sick, or just I'd be hospitalized. And then I was told I had to get off my medication, my nighttime medication, which was the one medication I was on at the time. I guess I was on two, so I was told to quit taking my stimulant as well. And the stimulant didn't so much bug me because I was exhausted anyway, and I just needed to rest anyway. But the nighttime medication was hard because I have hallucinations, I have sleep paralysis at night, and all of that, and that gets worse when your mental state is in a bad place. So those nights were scary and isolated and not fun. So what I ended up doing was I ended up watching on my phone through headphones stand-up comedy like all night long, off and on. I would just fall asleep to it and wake up to it, fall asleep to it, wake up to it. I have very, very interrupted sleep. It's one of my biggest symptoms actually now. My symptoms have kind of changed through the years. So that's what I did off and on. I just needed to get out of my head. I needed to hear something else other than COVID. So those first few weeks were rough. I'm still having COVID symptoms. Well, I no longer have the virus technically, but I am what's called a long hauler, or I have long COVID. It was getting better in the fall, and then I've had several relapses here in January and February that have been pretty intense. So they don't know what's going on with me, but I do have a long COVID doctor now. I'm working on things. So anyway, I have a whole new set of symptoms that are pretty debilitating. I'm on an upswing right now, and I'm working on things, but it's been a great challenge between the both. It's what's pushed me towards this nutrition thing a little bit more. Yeah, it's been a roller coaster the last few months, but it really has made me focus on the small things, and it's really has brought my focus to mental health a lot. I'm realizing that I was stretched a little thinner than I even, like, before I got COVID. I was stretched pretty thin. I was probably, again, running on fumes as a mom of a 2-year-old. I was trying too hard. My nervous system was overwhelmed. And I think that all of that probably led to my recovery being as difficult as it is. That and the fact that I had to be off my meds for several months, so I wasn't getting restful sleep. So yeah, it's been a roller coaster, and I'm on an upswing right now, and I'm going to keep going that way. I'm determined. I'm determined to get past the long COVID and to keep dealing with my narcolepsy, and maybe hopefully a even healthier way.
No, that's great to hear. Obviously, it gets challenging when you have an underlying disease such as narcolepsy, and then you add another disease that has fatigue and tiredness and energy issues that are tied to it as well. So it's kind of that double hit from that perspective. So I'm glad you're kind of starting to feel better from that perspective.
I'm embracing the nap
Right.
very much. In fact, I take 3 rests a day, which I generally fall asleep for. But I'm embracing the fact that that it's okay.
Yeah.
That it's okay, that this is what my body needs. And I think that's what people with narcolepsy, that's a really hard thing to swallow, is this is what my body needs. My body needs a nap.
Yeah, and I think so many people feel guilty. They perceive napping as a guilty thing, and they should try to push through and fight it because it's a sign of either weakness or that's not what's supposed to happen. And so encouraging napping is critical, and being able to accommodate that and incorporate it into your day is, I think, very important.
Yes, the working force, corporate world and all that, they really need to get on board with us, because I think there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
To not nap and to push.
Correct. So no, I think, again, being an advocate, and again, it's not easy. Many workplaces don't care if you say that, they just they want you to push through, but I think it's important to try to encourage it as much as you can. So for me, I would say a silver lining in this whole pandemic, at least from a healthcare perspective, is the sudden explosion of telemedicine. It's been a blessing in disguise. I think our practice was going to try to do it a few years ago. It's just insurances were on board. It was just many challenges to making it work under the rules and regulations that were in place. And now it's, you can get on FaceTime and have a visit with your doctor. And so for me, it's open, patients love it. They don't have to spend half the day driving to an office for a 10-minute appointment and then, miss work or miss school or whatnot. So it's huge. It's been a big win, I think, in terms of the pandemic perspective and changing the rules and regulations and making it a much more accessible way to see healthcare providers. Did you experience any telemedicine over the last year, or how have your healthcare team handled it?
Yeah, it's been great. I have a really responsive doctor anyway that was really good at using the portal, like email. So I did that with her a lot. In fact, I've been doing that a lot this week because I've been trying to figure out a medication thing. But she also did a phone appointment with me at the beginning of the pandemic. And then she's recently done a video one with me as well. So yeah, and I've been able to do that with other doctors too. that I've needed to see. So that's really been great. And yeah, like I would miss so many appointments back in the day when I was like 22 and trying to like make it. I just couldn't make it. And I mean, and people, you know, it was awful. I couldn't make it to a doctor's appointment, but I couldn't get myself to drive there. I would sleep through or yeah. So it's really going to be good for people with narcolepsy, I think.
Yeah, I think the other blessing has been more people working from home. If and don't have to drive or commute to work. Can they squeeze in a nap at home a little easier between Zoom meetings, possibly? So they're getting more sleep, which I think is also, we're a society that doesn't get enough sleep. So I think that's been a blessing as well. So
Yeah, I'm an extrovert and all I want to do is be with people. I'm a theater person. All I want to do is be with people and be with students and all of that. So I think that would drive me crazy. But I was lucky as a teacher, I had a classroom that if I had to, and I did have to many times, just lock my door during lunch and take a nap. But yeah, you're right. For a lot of people that have that kind of job, a sit down at the desk sort of job, then yeah, you could just go hang out on your couch for 20 minutes and then come back.
yeah, no, I agree. I think being social and seeing people is critical, but I think this has shown how sleep was being compromised. I think with work and everyone's schedule so busy with kids, and you just throw things into your day and you cut into your sleep. I mean, that's the only way it can work. So I think it
There may
shed
be more
light.
flexibility in the future, which would be
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah, exactly. Maybe a week on, a week off kind of thing. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. One of the things I also, want to reiterate, which you iterated earlier, is, the approach of pharmacologic drug approach and a non-pharmacologic. I think it's critical to have both in place and working on both well, because you don't want to rely on one approach only, which, we like to go a natural and non-pharmacologic approach as much as possible for most of our health. But this is a disease that often is hard to do that as a sole approach. But I think it's critical to make the pharmacologic therapies work better as well. So when you have both working well, I think you can optimize treatment, both from a non-pharmacologic and pharmacologic approach. And again, there's concerns that COVID might increase the diagnosis of narcolepsy, and we haven't seen full evidence of that. There is some suggestion there might be some cases out there, but I think the next couple of years will pan out if truly this is going to increase an incidence of narcolepsy, like a higher amount that we'll see in the next few years. So, you know, we'll kind of deal with that if that does happen. So that is a little bit of a concern for some of us. The other thing I wanted to touch base on, just let everyone know that, this is an exciting time in narcolepsy in the sense of therapies. From a pharmacologic standpoint, there's a lot of emerging treatments. We're involved in a trial for a once a night therapy. It's an open label study. I think Claire mentioned in the beginning. We expect more data from that study by the end of the year. There's a few other ongoing clinical trials for different areas of narcolepsy. So for 20 plus years, we only had like a couple of treatments, and now suddenly there's more and more. And I think it speaks volume to the research that has come out now, and we are understanding the disease a little bit better. And so I think the future is very bright in helping more and more people, manage it better. I think we're going to kind of finish up here. I really want to thank you for participating in this discussion, sharing, it's a lot to discuss, a lot of personal things you've brought up, and we really appreciate your, willingness to share. I think it's how other people learn, how other people maybe gain confidence about talking about their issues. Because many people can hold that in, I think. In terms of, again, are there any other tips that you want to give out before we turn it over to the audience for any questions we want to answer?
I'm not sure. I would say, yeah, just working on both. Don't give up. Keep going and keep finding things that work for you. And sometimes that means reevaluating expectations, life expectations, changing friendships, changing lifestyles. I don't drink anymore. I'm okay with that. You know, things like that, and find your happy place. You know, mine was dance, and I still dance with my daughter, you know, around I'm not dancing socially, but I think that's a big part of it too, and finding a community. I found a community through support groups. I forgot to mention that. It's a huge part, actually. That was one of my biggest things. I was a new mom and struggling, and I found Claire's podcast, and they talked about the support groups, and now I have my support group friends, and they're amazing, and that's been a huge part of my dealing with this as well, especially as the pandemic hit. It's amazing to have them every week. So yeah, just keep going and keep working on yourself too, and take care of yourself, and you're worth it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Before we go to some questions, thank you both so much. It was incredibly powerful and hopeful, and very moving. For those of you that are interested in the clinical trials, I did talk in some detail about them yesterday, but as a reminder, the Restore trial is available on our website, and that relates very much to what Dr. Roy has been talking about today. So you can read more about that on our website, and actually there's a link for you to sign up if that's a good fit for you. We also, to the podcast, we hosted one with Avadel Pharmaceuticals that was, it was Dr. Jennifer Goodman, who spoke quite freely and openly about Restore, and there's more details about the once nightly sodium oxybate as well on that. So that's the Narcolepsy 360 podcast. You'll also find that on our website. But we do have some questions. So the first one is for you, Cara, from Mary Beth, and she says, I'm curious, are you still friends with the friends from the scary Cataplexy CPR story? I think a lot of us were sitting there saying, I hope she's still not friends with them, but...
So I grew up in a town of 1,100 people. I graduated with 22 people in my graduating class. It was a very small rural town in Iowa. So these are people that are a part of such a tight-knit community that you don't really escape necessarily people. I am friends with one of them, the people that were there, but did not participate in the making fun of or whatever, the CPR thing that occurred. And she and I talked about the incident recently, as I have been thinking and working on my advocacy and my story. And she remembered, you know, I think she looks back on it with regret. They didn't know.
Right.
You know, I found forgiveness there, but I'm not necessarily, like, I'm not friends with them. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio now, and I have a very different life. So it's not like I see them regularly or anything.
Thank you. Another one for you, Cara. How do you manage driving now after having been in a potentially lethal accident? Do you have particular strategies that you could suggest?
I keep it freezing cold in my car if I'm going to drive long distances. I generally would have a caffeinated beverage, but I'm off of caffeine right now. So I'm not driving a lot right now anyway. But yeah, I keep it cold. Music. I like to talk to people on you know, hands-free. That really helps me, is just speaking to someone will really help me. And then I pull off to the side if I get tired. That's hard when you're just driving in the city, like you're just driving around, like you just need to go, I don't know, to the doctor's appointment and then home or whatever. But I just, in those cases, it's just like, I need to know that I can make it 20 minutes. And usually I can feel that out. But yeah. And, you know, stimulants and caffeine were for years, you know, the way that I did it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, and we have a lot of thanks in the chat features from our audience to both of you. I have a question for you, Dr. Roy. Is telehealth here to stay?
I hope so.
So do I.
In our practice, we're still 90% telehealth, actually. if I have a say, I would say our goals will be having a hybrid model going forward, where we're still internally debating how we would approach that. But I think one option was a half day of tele, a half day of in-office. And for patients who want one or the other, we can accommodate both. I would tell you majority of our patients that I've at least asked that question to, because we're still trying to figure it out, more than 2/3 say they prefer the telehealth visit, especially if you're on, you're stable, treatment's going well, we're just kind of doing refills or whatnot. There's there's no need to bring you into the office. And so really it comes down to insurance, unfortunately, and how they dictate the future of care this way. But as far as I can tell, I don't imagine them getting rid of this. It's too powerful at this point.
Yes, I agree. So you did mention, Cara, about support groups, and I had mentioned that earlier as well, and you specifically engaged with the pregnancy and parenting support. I'm so glad that that's been helpful to you. We have a question to that point. How did you manage pregnancy, delivery, and nursing in relation to your medications, Cara?
Well, it was a very long planning period in that my husband and I were married 10 years before we even started having children, because he got his PhD. So, and then we thought, okay, he got his PhD. He was able to then work a different job, in which I then didn't have to work full time. And we knew that. So we didn't even try starting to have a family until a lot later. I also had to go through 3 years of fertility. So there's that too. I was, for those 3 years, nursing, pregnancy and nursing, I was off my medications. I was also working very part-time. Yeah, it was hard. I would say that I probably, I don't know, it was rough. But I did it. I wanted that baby so bad. I wanted that baby so bad, and I wanted to do it without medication, and I did. And I even did it without, I had an epidural, but I did it without any other narcotics in the hospital, and with a broken foot. Broke my foot at 39 weeks pregnant. I would say I actually have some trauma to work through. It was a traumatic birth. It was a mess.
Goodness, your story just goes on and on.
It does. And I'm sorry, but I just had belief and faith that it was the best thing for me and the baby. And I had a husband who's amazing. That's all I can say. I had a partner in crime, and yeah.
Okay, to that point about support, we have a question here. It starts with, your story is so powerful. Can you share a little bit about your peer support in the sleepy community? You inspire me every day. Who are some inspirations for you?
Oh, well, Matt coming up. I mean, that guy, he's amazing. Yeah, I think he encouraged me to do Rising Voices, and he's encouraged me to do many other different little projects and things. And yeah, he's just incredible. And so many, I don't know, there's so many from the group that I would miss a name and then I would feel really, really bad. But Diana, who also runs one of the groups, Emily, who runs the pregnancy group, or pregnancy and parenting group, they're all super inspirational and amazing. Yeah, that support and that friendship is just like no other, because they get it.
Yeah, and they're online support groups, and they're not changing to any kind of physical location. So as I said earlier, they are free and accessible to our audience and our community. And now I think a question for Dr. Roy: is the once nightly trial different from Rest On?
It is different in the sense that it's an open label study, so which means everyone gets the medication in essence. So versus a typical trial where there's a placebo arm, an arm where you would get no medicine. So it has an advantage there. There's no risk of not getting the actual medicine. And the second thing is, if you've been on sodium oxybate in the past, it does not preclude you. It is actually part of the trial itself, where in Rest On, it was a requirement that you've never been on sodium oxybate. So there are some differences there.
Thank you. Another one for you, Cara. Thank you, Cara. I find that I rev myself up with caffeine and sugar so that my baseline is high. My body uses adrenaline like crazy. My cataplexy is set off with dramatic shifts in emotion rather than a gradual build to high emotions. Could you comment on that more? P.S. I also suppress my emotions during the day and then pay for it by processing them at night. Could you comment on a strategy that might address that? So it's two questions.
Yeah, with the first one, I think you're asking me to, I would say the doing what you're doing with the caffeine and the sugar has not served me well throughout my life. And also the use of adrenaline can actually be really, really, really hard on your nervous system and on your, it's just done hard things on me. But yes, as far as the dramatic shifts, in emotions, it's always a dramatic shift for me. It always has to take me by surprise. Maybe not always, but that is generally what brings on the real sudden drops. Yeah, and I don't know if any of us know why that is. I don't intentionally try to suppress emotion. So I feel like I have a lot of probably emotions that haven't been worked through. And like I said, this is something that I'm currently just sort of realizing in my life and that I am going to work towards, maybe even with some outside help, work towards a more balanced life of cataplexy and emotions. I'm sorry that you're going through this too. I don't have a great strategy. I can't imagine that processing them by yourself alone is real. I don't know. That feels real great all the time. But I suppose getting them out in some way or another would feel good. Like I would like to cry. I haven't cried in a long time. And I would like to. And I would like to laugh more. Mm-hmm. So it's a goal I have. I write down my goals every day. I journal a lot. That's a good thing. I journal a lot. And I journal my goals every night as if they already exist, as if they already are real. I'll say, I am energetic. I cry a lot. I laugh a lot. I'll write that down. So the journaling helps.
Yeah, it's a great technique. Thank you for that. We have quite a few questions and not very much time. I wonder whether Dr. Roy and Cara, you could, once I hand over to Matt, actually maybe stay in the chat and answer some of those in the Q&A rather. There's a lot of thanks and also some questions, a lot of people that are relating very much to your journey. And I think just sharing it is very validating. And also Dr. Roy, your contribution, just very helpful. I'm sure many of our audience wish they could meet you both and spend more time. I certainly do. But I need to pass over to Matt, and I do want to extend our thanks on behalf of Wake Up Narcolepsy and the community for taking the time today to spend with us and share your journey and your expertise. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Right.
Enjoy.
Thank you.